What if I told you that for decades, pretty much every official guideline on vitamin D has been, well, wrong? And that you might be paying the price for that mistake with your immune system, your bones, even your mood. I know it sounds pretty dramatic, but what if that normal range you see on your blood test wasn't a sign of good health at all, but was actually based on a huge calculation error that somehow became global policy? Okay, let's dive into this. For years, we've all heard it. The official advice was, take about 400 to 600 IU of vitamin D a day. You'll be fine. This number got everywhere. It was printed in textbooks. It became the standard. It was just baked into our collective health advice. But what if the real number, the amount most of us actually need to reach a healthy level in our blood, was closer to this? Almost 9,000 units. That's not just a small correction, that's a massive tenfold difference. So how on earth did we get from one number to the other? Well, the story really kicks off with a simple but absolutely profound mistake. A statistical slip-up hidden in the original math that had and is still having global consequences. So where did that almost 9,000 number come from? Well, back in 2014, some researchers decided to quietly double-check the math. They asked a really simple question. How much vitamin D do we actually need to take for 97% of people to get to a healthy blood level? And as you can see, the answer they got wasn't 600. It was 8,895. And this wasn't just a one-off finding. A few years later, another paper came out and put it in even blunter terms, calling it the big vitamin D mistake. The takeaway here is just staggering when you think about it. For decades, the entire world has been told to get by on just a tiny fraction, like 1/10 of the vitamin D it actually needs to be healthy. And look, this isn't just some academic debate about numbers on a page. This calculation error has created a very real, very widespread health crisis that's just operating silently in the background of all of our lives. To see just how real this is, let's take a look at a really surprising case study. India. You know, it's a hot, sunny, tropical country. You'd think everyone there would just be brimming with vitamin D. But the studies show something completely different. A staggering 70 to 90% of the population is deficient. And that's not just one specific group, it's right across the board. People in cities, people in villages, even the doctors and nurses. So how did we even get here? I mean, our biology hasn't changed, our environment has. We've literally swapped the open sky and sunlight for ceilings, concrete, and LED lights. We work inside, we drive everywhere in cars. And when we do get outside, most of us are wearing sunscreen, which can block over 99% of vitamin D production in the skin. From a biochemical perspective, it's like our skin is always indoors. And this whole modern lifestyle problem gets piled on top of our own biology as we get older. For example, our skin's ability to make vitamin D plummets by about 70% if you're carrying extra weight. Obesity can trap the vitamin and fat tissue, so your body can't use it. Darker skin pigmentation naturally requires more sun to get the same effect. And then you throw in potential issues with your gut, your liver, or your kidneys. You can see how easily all these factors start stacking up against us. But you gotta wonder, how could such a massive mistake have happened in the first place? To really get that, we have to go back and look at why these guidelines were even created. And it turns out they were designed to solve a very, very different and surprisingly narrow problem. This right here is the key. The original question about a century ago was incredibly simple. How much vitamin D do we need to give kids so their bones don't get soft and bendy from rickets? They figured out a few hundred units did the trick. And that tiny number became the anchor for every single recommendation that came after. This analogy is just perfect. Think about it. Does not dying of starvation mean you're financially healthy? No way. You're technically surviving, sure, but you are a million miles away from thriving. And our entire global vitamin D policy is based on that exact same flawed logic. We're not aiming for optimal health. We're aiming for not getting rickets. The bar was set at the absolute lowest level possible. Okay, so if not getting rickets is obviously the wrong goal, what should we be aiming for? Let's take a look at what the science actually says about what truly optimal levels look like. So here's the entire disconnect in one slide. The official guidelines basically say anything around 20 nanograms per milliliter or ngml is good enough. But there is a mountain of research now that shows for truly reducing your risk of all sorts of chronic diseases, the optimal range is way higher. somewhere between 40 and 80 milligrams per milliliter. And just look at what happens when you actually get your levels into that optimal zone. Data from incredible researchers like Garland and McDonnell shows that women with vitamin D levels over 60 milligrams per milliliter have a dramatically lower risk of breast cancer compared to women who are down below 20. And it's a really similar story for our immune health. One study found that adults who just kept their vitamin D levels above 38 nanograms per mole had way fewer viral respiratory infection. And this is the whole point. A level that's officially considered sufficient is not actually optimal. It's just barely enough to keep your bones from bending. So the big question is, how do we realistically get our levels up into that optimal zone? Well, it really just comes down to understanding the tools we have available in our modern world. The sun, of course, is our original and most powerful source. A short little session can generate 10 to 20,000 IU food. On the other hand, it's a really weak source. You'd have to eat salmon for pretty much every meal, which is why for the vast majority of us living modern lives, supplementation is the only practical, realistic tool we have. Now, I know the obvious question is taking that much safe? And the answer is yes. Risk assessments have shown pretty clearly that daily intakes up to 10,000 IU are safe for most adults. And remember, that amount is basically what your own body can make from just a little bit of time in the sun. The problem isn't that 10,000 IU is a dangerously high dose. It's that we've all been conditioned to think that doses like 600 IU are normal when they're actually far, far too low. But here is a critical piece of the puzzle you can't ignore. Vitamin D doesn't work by itself. It has an absolutely essential partner, magnesium. You can think of magnesium as the key that's needed at every single step of the process, from making vitamin D in your skin to converting it in your back and finally activating it in your kidneys so your cells can use it. It's simple. If you're low on magnesium, your vitamin D just can't do its job properly. Alright, let's zoom out and put this all together. Fixing this isn't some crazy biohack. It's really just about giving your body back a fundamental nutrient it was designed to have in abundance. When it comes to correcting a deficiency, there are really two main paths. For a generally healthy person who's just low, a daily dose of 5 to 10,000 IU along with those cofactors like magnesium is a really typical starting point. But for people whose bodies are, let's say, systems under attack, like with an active autoimmune disease, it often requires much higher doctor-guided protocols to overcome what scientists call vitamin D resistance. And this all leads us to a really fascinating final question. If just fixing a simple deficiency can have such powerful, widespread benefits, well, what happens when we start using vitamin D as a sharp, precise therapeutic tool to actively calm down an overactive immune system? We're going to explore the clinical protocols for doing exactly that in the next part of the series.